Alrighty then. So last week we ended with my translation of Shemot, that's Exodus to the American people and otherwise non-Hebrew speakers, 22:21. And my translation was, "You shall not make any widow or orphan suffer." So we begin today with Shemot 22:22. Literally in English, it would just basically say, "If make suffer, you make suffer them. For if cry out, he cry out to me, hear I will hear, crying out they." If you read that a few times, you could probably get that. So we start off with the Hebrew word im, which means if, lo, behold, certainly, truly. It's just an opening of a sentence. It's something that we don't do in English anymore. Sometimes they put the words in English and in Greek for sure. They both did this. There was a word that was put there to indicate the beginning of a sentence because in the ancient world, they didn't have grammar. Is it the right? That's not the right word. Punctuation. They didn't have punctuation, so it's difficult sometimes to tell where a sentence began and where it ended. Not as difficult in Hebrew, but at times it was difficult. So they would use this word "im" in cases like that. But in this case, we're talking in English the word "if." This is conditional, and this is "aneh." If make suffer. Now this is that word that was in PL. It's in PL again. It's to oppress, to depress, to afflict, to take away. Yeah, we won't talk about that. To afflict the soul. It was from the root ana, which was to bestow labor upon anyone, to exercise oneself in anything, to till the ground, to cultivate the earth, blah, 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 blah. So if you make their life hard by taking things from them, by you can take things from them with your words, and that would certainly fall within this category. But this is, you do things that cause their life to be harder. That's the main thing that we need to know. Then it's te'ameh. That's the same word again, and it's also in PL. So you realize in Hebrew they're saying it twice, so now this is the punctuation. That's how they did it. They said things over and over and over again. And that's how you're supposed to read it when you read Hebrew. It's supposed to get louder and more intense. So he said it twice. If you make them suffer and make them suffer, Then it's oto, which is just a pointer, literally like putting an arrow in a sentence. Then it's ki, which is the word if, for, because. And then it's im, that's your if, lo, behold word again. So it's so foggy at this point. Za'ok. But that kind of clears it up. If somehow you make them cry out, especially for aid, you make them cry out in any way, really. You make them cry out because what you did to them was painful. You hurt them in some way and they cried out. But it's more about if they cry out in, asking for help. Somebody help me please. And then it says yitzat. That's the same word. Remember what happens if they cry out Eli, to me. This is God. God is the me here. If they cry out to God, shamoa, that's the word for hear. It's to hear with the actual physical ear, to understand it with the whole heart and mind, because in Hebrew, the heart and the mind is the same thing. So if your heart says yes and your mind says no, you're suffering from schizophrenia in biblical Hebrew, because there was no difference between them. The heart, the mind, the soul, all of that's one thing in Hebrew, in the Bible. They don't say it so you have three different bullet points. That has nothing to do with Greek thinking. So anyway, but you had to understand it with your whole heart and mind. Then you had to act upon it. Now, generally it's of obedience, but act upon it. So if God's saying that he's going to hear, He's also saying he's going to understand their cry, and he's also saying he is going to respond to their cry. Then he says, Esha. It's the same word. Hear, I will hear. You get it? It's with the aleph in the front of it. It's I will. So because it's Shema, like, as in here. But then they put the aleph in the front of the word, and it's Eshama, right? So it's I will hear. And then it says Za'akato. Well, we've already had this word. It's the Za'ok, which is I will hear what? I will hear their cries. And by the way, he's going to respond to them. So your translation then becomes, you actually make them suffer. And the them here are the widows and the orphans. If you make them suffer, be sure that when they absolutely cry out to me, I will absolutely hear their cries. Now, when I was a child, I was orphaned because in biblical Hebrew, your mom can still be alive, you can still be living with her, but if your father has abandoned you, either through death or just abandonment, that child was an orphan. So by biblical standards, I was an orphan. My father abandoned me before I was born. And only a few months ago decided maybe he ought to try to start up some kind of relationship with me. Whatever, man. Good luck with that. But that's how I feel about it. I'm pondering it. What can I say? But I remember that my situation got pretty bad during a few years of my childhood. And I remember begging God to save me from my situation. And he didn't, as far as I could tell. It only got worse. It didn't get better. But I can look back on it now and say, can you really say that God didn't hear and didn't respond given where I wound up? The real God, way out there in the cosmos somewhere, actually heard that little 9-year-old boy crying out for help. And that little 9-year-old boy now has an education and is a rabbi and teaches the law of God. I think somebody heard and acted upon what he heard. That's all I have to say about that. Verse 23. And furious anger me, and slay me, you with sword, and be they wives, you widows, and children, you orphans. I think you kind of get this one. So here's what he's saying he's going to do. The hara, and furious, to burn, to be kindled, always spoken of anger. There's no other way around this. So this is a word that the next word is api, the nose. And why is it properly? It's a breathing place, the member with which one breathes. The nose, used of the nose of men and of animals, the blowing, the breathing, blah, 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 blah. Why did they do that? Because it's used of anger, which shows itself through hard breathing. It's of the nostrils moving in and out from rage. So you've used two words that are essentially saying the same thing. So what you're doing is making this more pronounced, more important. It's louder. So you have no idea the fury and the rage that's about to come your way. Then it's the haragti, and slay me. It's to kill. So persons more frequently used, but also of the slaughter of enemies in war. So this is where they say they slaughtered their enemies because they were, back then it was swords, and they cut them up like a slaughter, like if you cut up an animal to cook it, that's called a slaughter. We call it a barbecue these days. Back then they called it a slaughter. So they made that same comparison because with the knives, you're cutting everybody apart. So it's used in that way, whether by a sword or even of the throwing of a stone. Hence, it is applied also to a pestilence, to a viper, and even poetically to grief. And by that they mean it kills, it destroys. There's death coming behind with this, and it's an awful death. That's the idea. Etchem, I will slay you. So the one who perpetrates this on the widow and the orphan, the one who does this sort of thing, is going to be slain by God. Now, do we take these things literally, or is this Hebrew in an idiomatic language? Keep that in mind. Etchem, I'll slay you, becharev, with a sword. A sword as laying waste, to be sharp. The edge of a sword, it's applied to other cutting instruments, of the circumcision knife, that's what they call this, of a razor, a graving tool, an axe, poetically used of the carved tusk of the hippopotamus, because they used to make a knife out of that. What's that knife called you have in the kitchen with the white blade? Ceramic, kind of like the hippopotamus thing. Not a new idea. Y'all thought that was a brand new idea, didn't you? All right, so you get, I'm going to slay you with the sword. What is the sword of God? The word of his mouth. What are we talking about then? Does the Torah not tell us what's going to happen to somebody who does this to the person? God's not going to pull out a sword and literally run it through some human being. He didn't run it through that man who did to me what he did to me, right? That doesn't happen. He's going to slay that man with the words of the Torah. Every man, as long as he lives, is subject to the law of God, to the Torah. And by the way, I stole that from the New Testament. Yes, that's in the New Testament. Romans chapter 7, verse 1, if you want to look it up. Just saying. And by the way, if you're Jewish, you're like, why are you telling us that? Memorize what I just said. You'll want to use that the next time you get in an argument with a Christian. I'm just saying, think about it. All right, so then it says, V'hayu, and they will be Neshechem, and they will be, who are they? The wives, and your wives, Lemanot, will be widows, Uvenechem, and your children, Yotomim, will be orphans. It amazes me that we recently found out that the guy that did all that stuff to me passed. And somehow, even though he did not literally, let me put this as delicately as I can, he did not possess all the equipment necessary to have children, but somehow he had a miracle child in the, last 10 years or so. And now his wife is a widow, and his child is an orphan. There's some people who get upset about that. Oh, that's not fair. That's not right. Really? Is it? I think it is fair, and I think it is right. Oh, how can he punish that child? What's going to happen if that child cries out to him? Is he going to ignore him? No. What's going to happen if that widow cries out to him? Is he going to ignore her? No. Who got punished here? The man. Did that affect the wife and the child? Yes. God's not here to stop us from being affected by the decisions of others. That's not part of what God does. Others decide to do things that affect us, we're still affected by it, right? So when a man decides to hurt a widow or hurt an orphan, his wife and his children are going to be affected by his decisions. Just like if he gets his paycheck and he goes off and drinks it, his wife and his children are going to be affected by that. If he goes off and gets in a car drunk and crashes it and kills himself, his wife and his children are going to be affected by it. Our decisions have a tendency to affect others. That's not the punishment there, if you will, right? God's just promising that the men who do this to widows and orphans, they will be punished. It may take 40 years, 50 years, but they will be punished. All right, so verse 24. Literally, it's if silver you shall join people need, the poor with you, not you shall be to them as lender, not you shall put on him interest. You might have even already got this one. That's an interesting thing. So again, it starts with if. So this one is conditional. Kesef. Now it's the Hebrew word for silver. And we've already had this word in this section. It's silver, so called from its pale color. So it's actually the word for the color of silver. So it's obviously used of silver, just like we do. We call it silver because it is the color of silver, right? Anyway, but it's used for money. It's used for, they put the little thing on the weighing scale over here, and then they put the silver over here. And when there's a balance, you know how much that silver is worth, according to whatever the economy is at the time. So there's something about money here. Talve, you shall join, literally. So it's from lava, which is to adhere, to be joined closely to anyone, to borrow, to receive a loan. And what they're saying here, they literally are talking about a loan. If you loan somebody money, you have joined yourself to them. You have become their partners. So when the bank loans a farmer money, they ought to be able to come out and work the field while the farmer's on vacation. Somehow that doesn't work that way. But isn't it just, it's just as much their farm as it is that guy's, right? Just saying. Anyway, you join yourself to a person when you loan them money. Then there's the word et, which is like putting an arrow in a sentence. Ami, my people. If you loan money to the my, here is God, my people. And there are people so called from their being collected together, right? Because today in modern Israel, they've tried to make Judaism a bloodline, which are beyond ridiculous. I don't know how it ever got this way. You have to prove that you're Jewish on your mother's side. You can't be Jewish on your father's side. If you're trying to get into Israel and become a citizen and all that stuff, you got to be able to prove that your mama was somehow a Jew. She had to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. She had to be on the rolls at Auschwitz or whatever. You have to prove that your mama was that if you're going to go over there and be that. Wait. Doesn't the Bible itself talk about the mixed multitude, the multitudes from all over the earth coming together and saying, we will do? So from its very inception, Judaism has been a religion, not a bloodline. But as people are, there's this tendency in people to want to somehow be elevated above everybody else. They want to somehow be better than everyone else. That's why nowadays the Russian Jews will tell you that the word Yehudi, Jew, they say that's from the root of dog pack. So they've gone literally from calling everyone who isn't a Jew a dog to calling each other dogs. And they do this because their dog pack is the higher up the rung. They're the more purebred dogs, and when they say it to somebody, you're the mutt, you're the Heinz 57. That's why they do it. The yod at the beginning of the word is it's the hyphenated form of God's name, if you will. The next part of it, because it's two words slammed together, Yehudi. The Hud is the word for follower. So if you're a follower of Yahweh God, which is literally what it means, then that means you live by the Torah. Because that's one of the truths that's lost in the Western world today, is that the Torah is God's lifestyle. God's lifestyle. It's why he gave it to mankind, so that they would know how to traverse this place that they live. And so if we follow God's lifestyle, that's what makes us a Jew. Not if we can prove somehow, some way that we came through the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. It's not about that, because the truth is, and now they're doing all this DNA stuff as if they have Abraham's DNA. Think about it. They don't have his DNA, but they're going around testing people, saying, "Oh yeah, you're from the tribe. My family's somehow from the tribe of Levi." How do they know? Did they have Aaron's DNA to compare that to? No, some guy in Israel said, "Hey, I'm a Levite," so there's their baseline. He might have been a Heinz 57. He may have been an Italian for all we know. Do you follow what I'm saying? The science is utterly flawed, and it cannot be trusted, which is why Israel doesn't trust DNA in this case, because there is no way to affirm that your baseline is real. But they're still trying to do that somehow, trying to prove somehow that you're Jewish via that way. You were circumcised on the 8th day, and they're by a moil, and he can verify and all that kind of stuff. And so they're going through this, not understanding that God's people are a people because they were collected together. And what collects them together? It's the Torah. So basically what I'm saying is, if you're not living by the Torah, you're not a Jew. I don't care if you are directly descended from Abraham. Abraham wasn't a Jew, he was a Chaldean. What made him a Jew? Obedience to God's law. Oh, wait a minute, Rob. The law wasn't given till long after Abraham. That happened in Sinai when Moshe, right? Hello. Have you not read the Bible? Does it not say he had the law? Yes, it does. Have you not read the Talmud? Does it not show in detail that he had a law? Even if his law was only 3 laws, if God only told him to do one thing, let's break it down to one thing. God only told him to do one thing. Now, we know better. If we've ever read the book, we know better. But let's say it was. It's still God's law, is it not? And I guarantee you, if he gave Abraham that law, it's in the Torah. Let's think about this. Judaism is a religion. And those of us who live according to God's law, that's what makes us a Jew. It has nothing to do with our bloodline. I wish Israel would get that. I wish we could get past this nonsense. Anyway, so that's why they're called a people, and God's saying my people, so it's the people who follow his way of life, his Torah. Then the word et, the pointer again, it's going to point to he'ani, the poor, his people who are poor, his people who are poor. To be afflicted, wretched, poor, often with the added idea of piety, meekness, and mildness. You know why it says that? Because it was the 1850s when that was written. That's nonsensical. When they changed, what they did was they changed the word for Torah observance to piety, because that's what piety used to be. Piety then became people who walked around like this and acted like they were Gandhi or something. Give me a break. If you were pious, you were a Torah observant. But he's saying my people. Well, that automatically infers Torah observance. So he's talking about the poor, the ones who have small needs. Imach, that are among you. Lo, that's the no, you cannot. It will not be what? What's not going to be? What's not going to be? Lo to them. Kenosheh. You will not be to them as a lender. To borrow, to take, to receive, to lend to anyone of a person who borrows. You are not going to be as the lenders are. Lo tishi moon. So here's the thing that you're not going to be allowed to do that lenders do. It doesn't mean you can't lend. It means you can't do this thing here. To put, to set, to place is from the word shun, or sum rather, not shun. Yeah, this is tes C moon, not she moon. I do that all the time. It's an S, not an SH. Sorry, tes C moon. You shall put. You will not put what? You will not add to this thing. I lied. Do not add upon this thing. Neshech. Interest. The Bible calls it usury, but it's interest. It's what we know today as interest. You will not add interest to another Jew or to a poor Jew. If you loan money to my people, the poor among you, you shall not be as a creditor to them. You shall not charge them interest. You cannot charge a poor Torah observant person interest. That's what Law 24 says. 25. Unfortunately, I couldn't find much on this area of law that was said by the sages, by Rashi and Rabbi and Rashi and Rabbi. Who was I going to say? Rashi and who do I talk about all the time? Onkelos and Akiva. You know, those guys didn't say it. They did say stuff, but most of it was so moronic. And I'm sorry if you love these people. I love them too, but half of what they said or more is just moronic. It's because they didn't speak Hebrew. And if they did speak Hebrew, it was such a butchered version of it that they didn't understand the most basic of idioms. And that bothers me tremendously. And when they don't follow the idioms, when they make things literal, everybody's dying to death. And they're making up all these rules about, oh, this one has to have a hot coal poured down his throat. This one has to be stoned to death. And this one has to be, they have to lay him down and take a big stone and push it over a hill and drop it on his head. Oh, my God. That's what your sages gave you. Come on. What? I got to get off of this. It makes me angry. All right, so here's verse 25. If you hold, garment close friend you, because we're assuming that, you're a Jew and the people you're dealing with are Jews. That's why they call them close friends. So if you hold garment close friend you, till come the sun, you shall return it to him. So you have the word im, which is if. Chavo. This is our first time seeing this word. It's to tighten a cord, to twist, and thus to bind. Properly tying or binding. Poetically used for a cord. To bind someone by a pledge, to take a pledge for someone. And we've already seen that if you're loaning somebody money, you have bound yourself to them. And here we're using this word for tying and binding. Then it says tachbo, which we've already had, is tighten the cord, to twist, to bind, right? It's the same word. So if you bind up, right? Salmat, a garment. So in other words, what they're saying is if you're taking this man's talit, this thing here that I'm wearing, if you're taking that thing as collateral, they're coming up, man, I just need $10. I got, a flat on my car and I got to get the flat fixed and I got so I can get to work. I get paid this evening. I'll bring in the $10. And you're like, give me your talit. I don't trust you to pay me back. Okay, so if you do that, that's not interest, that's collateral. So here's what we're talking about. So if you're taking this guy's garment for collateral, his samat, his garment, the thing that he wore, because this is written way back before talitot, before this word in plural, the talit, the thing we wear, talitot, plural. Before the time of that, they wore ponchos. What's the word for that? The English word they normally use. in the Bible. I can't think of it, but it's a poncho. A cloak. Yeah, it's not what I'm really looking for, though. Tunic. That's the word I'm looking for. The Bible usually calls it a tunic or a cloak. All right, so if you've taken this guy's tunic, his garment, any part of his clothing, that's why they've switched to this word, because it's anything that he owns. Then it says re'echa, the close friend you. It's from re'ah. It's the companion, a friend with one. This is somebody you know better. You know him better than he knows himself, and he knows you better than you know. This is somebody that's a good friend. That's the word we're talking about. Then it's odd, so that's of time, so it's till or until. Bo. So if you're going to hold this until he comes, that's to come to you, or something is coming. He's either coming back, you're going to hold this until he comes back. Well, it could be that, or it's Hashemesh, the sun. So you're going to hold this until the sun to Shivenu. When the sun is either coming up or going down, you got to give it back. You will return it. Shuv, to turn back, to return. You have to return it to him. So here's your translation. If you absolutely hold, and then in brackets, as collateral, your close friend's garment, you shall return it to him when the sun goes down. So irregardless of whether you got paid or not, that cloak has to go back. There's a reason for this, but it had to go back. Verse 26, if he covering he, to only he garment he, to skin he, in what he lodge, and be, for cry out he to me, and hear me, for gracious me. That one's a little more difficult, but it's not terrible. Key, which is the word for if. So if, then your next word is kiv. So it's kiv. If his chesuto, his covering, metaphorically a covering of the eyes, is a gift of appeasement. It's a bribery. Like this guy saw you do something illegal, and so you give him a little money under the table. That's the covering of his eyes. And they use the same word for that way. So it's of secret and hiding something. Well, what does your cloak do? It hides your body, right? But it also, it doesn't just hide your body from someone seeing it. It hides your body from the cold. That's the idea. Levada, not vav, but va, levada, to only he, which is his or he, simlato, his garment. It's simla, the garment, whether men or women, especially a large outer garment, which at night persons wrapped themselves. Remember, this is a time when people didn't change their clothes every day. They had one pair of clothes. My wife tells a story about her, I guess most people know by now that her first husband passed away, but his mother used to have, what was the dress made out of? Polyester. She had a polyester dress. It was her Sunday dress. It was the one she wore to church every Sunday. And it had a shiny spot on the backside because it was the only nice dress she had. And she wore it so much that the polyester got shiny in that one spot from her sitting on it. You get what I'm saying? I mean, even now, maybe you only have that one outfit that you wear when you go to service, right? And I wear the same thing almost every single week, right? Well, the same pants. I wonder if do I have a shiny spot? We're gonna have to look. I don't know, but I do wear the same pants. I wear a different shirt every week. See, I've got like 3 that I rotate at any given time, that kind of thing. So anyway, they didn't live like that. They had the one. So if it had been made out of polyester, which obviously it wasn't back then, but if it had been, it would have had a shiny spot on it. I'm just saying, but they didn't just, this outer garment, they kept it with them because, let's say you don't make it home. Well, it's what you're going to wrap up in and sleep that night. And when you do get home, guess what you're going to wrap up in? That's your blanket at night. You follow what I'm saying here? So how's the guy going to stay warm? You loan him the money. He's got to stay warm that night. You got to give that thing back. So the idea here isn't about giving back the cloak. The idea is you can't keep collateral that's going to cause harm to a child of God. You can't cause a child of God, particularly we're talking the poor, you can't cause them to suffer in some way because you have their collateral. So if they put their car up as collateral and you loan them this money, you know that if they got to have that car to get to work the next morning, what should you know from this? What should you be able to see here? They need the car to get to work. That's how you're going to get your money back. So anyway, it's using the garment. This is an example. In their time, it would have worked literally, because I can't imagine anybody taking someone's garment for collateral, but maybe they did. But again, this is an example. It's not supposed to be taken literally. So if you got the garment, le oro, it's the covering to his skin, bame, in what, literally in what, yishkav, in what he lodged. How's it gonna lodge? How's it gonna dwell somewhere at night and stay warm? That's literally what's being asked here. Vahayu, and be, what's our next word? Ki yitzak. And so if he cries out, Eli, to me, and the me here is God. So if he cries out to me, Beshamati, here's Shema, I'll hear, I'll certainly understand it, and I, God, will act upon it, right? I'm not saying I'm God, I'm saying the I here is God. I hope you know. Then it says, Ki Hanu, that's from, the root word here is womb. It's why we use it for graciousness. It's that mercy and that graciousness and that love that comes from deep within. I need. Again, that's the word from I, me, myself, and I. That's the way that word's translated. I am gracious, God said. So your translation is, for it is his only covering. It wraps his skin. With what will he lodge? And it will be that when he cries out to me, I will hear him, because I am gracious. Got to be careful with the poor, the widow, and the orphans. You've got to be really careful with these people. And by the way, ignoring them so that you don't do them wrong is worse than trying to help them and messing up here and there. Because God is gracious, remember? And so if you mess up, you were trying to help, but you only made things worse, God is gracious. That'll be okay. But if you ignored them altogether, and by the way, as a congregation, we do not ignore them. We send them money every year. Just to make sure y'all know, we're not ignoring them. We don't send much because we're not we're not some giant mega synagogue. Or is that a megagog? Sorry. Now, I didn't say mega God. I said megagog, G-O-G, as in synagogue. Anyway, some people call it a synagogue. I've never known, should I correct this person or will they get mad at me? Anyway, we got a little time left. Let's look at 27. How many verses do we have in this one? 31. Let me see if I can push these out a little faster. Judges not you shall marginalize, and leaders and people you not curse. Ooh, we may not get any further than this one. This is funny because this is one of those things, the reason why I get so upset with these sages is because generally they see this word Elohim and all of a sudden it's God. Elohim, it's God. No, it's judges. The word here begins, the first word is Elohim. It's the plural. It's the plural of majesty. It's not the plural of God. But because the word is used of God, it's going to be God's, Gods, right? Even if it's speaking of the one and only true God who is not three in one and all that stuff in Judaism, like what the Christians have. He's the one and only God, right? And even he is spoken of in plural. Why is that, you ask? Oh, I can hear most of you yelling. You know what the answer is. Because they speak of a living God in plural. Because a living God has emotion. He feels anger, does he not? God already said he'll be enraged. He feels love. He feels graciousness. He said he was a gracious God, right? So God has all of these emotions, and his face moves. He has the joyous face. He has the angry face. You know what I'm saying? He has all these attributes, so he is God's in the plural because he is alive. That's why they say it in plural. Not because there's more than one, but because he's alive. Hopefully you all knew that. Okay, so then, but that gets, translated as God, and then all of a sudden you've got God doing the weirdest things. But it says, even in the explanation, used of angels, which that's a Christian thing, not a Jewish thing. It became a Jewish thing, but it the Jews stole it from the Christians. Yeah, that happens. But it's used of judges for sure. So then it says lo, that's your negative article, tikalel. So this is what the lo is connecting to. Not you shall marginalize. To make light of. It's the opposite of heavy. To be diminished. You don't diminish. You don't cease from what the judges judge. It's to disgrace one's parent or their teacher by following a different way. So if your parent is a follower of Judaism and they raised you in Judaism, when you go off and become a Christian, you have disgraced your parents, and God's telling you right here you're not allowed to. You've disobeyed a judge. Uh, so anyway, you don't disobey the judge. This is a Nasi. And the Jews here know what a Nasi is, right? It's a leader. It's the one they call the lifted up, the prince. The prince of the synagogue is called the Nasi, right? That's where we get this, is from this very word. General use both of they use it of kings and of leaders, particularly leaders of the tribes, captains of the tribes of Israel, and your leaders of your synagogues. So these are the people we're talking about. But as you can also see, if this is to live a different lifestyle than the way your parents raised you, then your parents are also your Nasi. So we're talking about leadership. We're talking about a hierarchy that does in fact exist in Judaism. It does in fact exist in God's world. It's not a kumbaya, we're all exactly the same socialistic world like some have accused it of being. So then we have Mecha and your people. Remember, that's the people. They're called the people because they're gathered together. And in our case, it's because we're gathered together via Torah observance. Then this is lo ta'or, not cuss. Don't cuss. No, it's not cuss. It's curse. I totally read that wrong. I read cuss, and it's curse. to be abhorrent, to be detestable. A kind of enchanters who were supposed to render days unfortunate by their imprecations. So they would there. This was something that was really common in Mesopotamia leading up to the time of the writing of the Torah and the around the time of Abraham when he lived. So it's way before the writing of the Torah, I should say. But it goes all the way back then. It's all throughout Mesopotamia. These people had symbols, and those symbols made certain days evil. And one group maybe every Tuesday was evil. Another group maybe only Friday the 13th was evil. That's a holdover from that, and I'm telling you the truth about that. So those things were all throughout Mesopotamia, and that's kind of, this word is connecting to that idea. So anyway, your translation here is, you shall not marginalize the judges. You know, you're not going to say, oh, you know, he's just being uh, a little too orthodox here. He's just taking this a little too far. No, you don't. If the judge, if you're, and by the way, your rabbi is your judge. So if your rabbi says this is the way you're supposed to live, you don't say, oh, you know, he's just overdoing it. You're not allowed to do that. If that's what your rabbi says, that's what you do. If that's what your Nasi says, that's what you do. Are you following what's being said here? You don't play it down. If he says you have to be here on Shabbat, then you have to be here on Shabbat. You don't say, well, but, you know, I got these things that I have to do over here. Anyway, so you shall not marginalize the judges, and you do not curse the leaders of the people. Of the words the judges, Ha Elohim, Rashi believed this verse was speaking of the judges and not of God. So I agree with Rashi. Rashbam felt that God was taking into consideration what usually happens when people are on the negative side of his judgment, which I agree with that as well. It's one of those, oh, he's just being too overly dramatic. He's just taking it too far, right? Because they're marginalizing what the judge said. Or the judge says, I find you guilty, you have to do 10 years in, you know, hard labor, whatever, and then they get mad at the judge and start cursing the leader, right? They start cursing the judge. So Rashbam felt that's why God did it. I don't agree with trying to give reason to God. If God wants us to know why he gave a law, he tells us. If he doesn't care that we know, we probably don't know. And to do what Rashbam did here is, I think, a little out there, but I don't disagree with it either. All right. Got 13 minutes. I think we can get through this. 12 minutes. Okay. In verse, how did you say we have just 31? Okay. Let's see if we can get through this. Let's run a little bit long here. On 28, it says, right produce you, and liquids not, you shall delay. Firstborn and sons you shall give to me. So it's mela'atecha, right, your right produce. This is from the word mela'ah, mele'ah. Its fullness, abundance, especially used of the portion of corn and wine which was to be offered to God as tithes, or as what we think of as first fruits. So don't delay to give your tithes. Don't delay in particular to give your first fruits. And then it says Vadim Aha and your liquids. In other words, so whatever it is, if you get paid a paycheck, don't delay to give the tithe from that money. If you're a farmer and you literally make your money from the sales of the corn that you raise, don't delay to give your tithe of that corn, because there was a time when they actually took a percentage, 10% of their corn and brought it to the storehouse. I wouldn't want to do that. I don't have a storehouse. Don't bring it to me. Go sell it and give me 10% of your, not give it to me. I know people think that that's all my personal bank account. No, give it to the ministry, and the ministry will distribute it however it needs to be distributed. But all I'm saying is, back in the day, they would actually bring 10% of the corn or 10% of the wine or whatever it was. And so remember, these are examples. They're not supposed to be taken literally. So then it says lo, which is the negative article, te'acher. Don't delay. Don't fall behind on this one. Don't let it tarry, because what's going to happen? You might not pay it, and then the next paycheck comes, and you owe, and you owe, and you owe, and there's going to be another law that says once you've stolen from God, you have to pay it back more than what you owed. So you don't want to get into this cycle. Bechor is the firstborn, whether of men or animals. Metaphorically, it's using anything which is cheap, first of its kind. Banecha, so in this case, it's your sons. Literally, we're talking. It could have been anything until now. Now we know it's your sons. T10. You shall give your first son li. That's God saying to me. So your translation is, you shall not delay your right produce and liquids. You shall give the firstborn of your sons to me. So you understand, when they're saying you don't delay your right produce, your liquids, it's telling you that the first fruits, the soon as you get your payment, you give your tithe to God. Don't delay that, regardless of what it is or how you get it. Now, other words, give the firstborn of your sons to me. Rashi felt that this meant that the firstborn son could be redeemed for 5 shekalim, that's shekel in plural, as per Leviticus 27:6. I actually agree with that. The Sepharno said that the firstborn son was to be dedicated to the temple in the study of Torah. I think that's utterly wrong, but what's wrong with it? You know what I'm saying? If that's what you want to do, if you want to make sure that your firstborn son becomes a rabbi, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing. And yes, that is the decision of the parent, not the child. Now, of your right produce and liquids, Kasuto said, from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses are archaic expressions that were preserved unchanged in the legal terminology. So what's Kasuto saying? Basically the same thing that I said. It's a term that comes from Mesopotamia. It's not unique to Judaism. It's not unique to Hebrew. In fact, Hebrew probably borrowed it, but it was used in legal terminology. Think about when you read a legal piece of paper. Doesn't it sound like an old King James Bible to those of you who have ever picked one up and read it? Or for that matter, like an old Jewish Bible. They all used to say the these and the thus and the thou and all that kind of stuff. So he's saying that it's an old legal expression. So it doesn't. We're not talking about the literal fruit from the ground and liquid from the vine. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the tithe. All right, 29. Literally in English, it's also you shall do to bulls you, to sheep you, 7 days. He be mother he, in day the 8th you shall give he to me. All right, so it's ken, which is also ta'aseh, you shall do. That's from that word asa, to properly, to labor, to work about, to do, to manufacture, to fabricate. So we say do. You will do. Well, what are you going to do? Leshorecha, you will do whatever it is. You're going to do this to your bulls. Remember that? That's because of the horns, so it can be ox or cattle. Then it's lezonecha, and that's your word for the flocks. It's usually translated sheep, but always in the Jewish world, it was all of the Bible. It was always the sheep and the goat together. And the zone is the word that they use for flocks, and that literally means small cattle. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Then it's Shivat, which is 7, Yamim, 7 days. So then you have, it will be from Emo, 7 days from its mother. Emo is mother. Bayom, in the day, Hashemini, in the day of the 8th. So 7 days, that newborn male will be with its mother. But on the 8th day, Titeno, you shall give it. Or you shall give he. You can say he or it, because it's the same word in Hebrew. You're going to give it. Remember, you're going to hand it over. You're going to put it in the power of someone else. And who is that? Lee. That's God saying to me. So the translation is, likewise, you shall do to your bulls and your sheep. 7 days he will be with his mother, and on the 8th day you will give him to me. Now remember, we've already had these laws about this firstborn. If you remember, it's way back in, I think, chapter 12, where it said that they could be purchased back. You either give them to the temple, or you give the temple the money for the animal. Remember, we've already had that. So it's a reiteration of an earlier law. Verse 30 literally says in English, and men holy you shall be to me, and flesh in field torn, not you shall eat ye, to dog you shall cast it. That almost is self-explanatory, isn't it? Ba'anshe and men. It's men as opposed to women. Now, remember, in Hebrew, everything's written in the masculine. So it could still be talking about women, I'm just saying. Kodesh, that's holy. It's holiness. What is holy? It's a holy thing. It's something that's consecrated to God. If we're living the Torah lifestyle, we are holy. We are consecrated to God. It's of the things that were consecrated to the temple. Then it says tiyun. You will be holy. You will be. Right? Then it says li. God is saying, you will be holy to me. Uvasar. That's flesh. That's your skin out here, this stuff here. Something about the skin. Basade, in the field. It's a field. It's what you think of as a field. It's a grassy place out there. Terefa. So if in this field there's something that is torn, we've already had this word. Remember, it's the ripping apart of you got a sheep and some animal came along and ripped it apart. It was in that law about what you do when you've given it over to someone else to contact. Hopefully you remember that. This is lo tochelu. You shall not eat it. If you found an animal in the field and it's been torn up by another animal, roadkill is what we're talking about. Don't eat roadkill. Or in this case, field kill. I'll help myself out. La chelev, to dogs. Caleb, dog. La chelev, or Caleb, to the dogs. It's the word for barking and yapping is what the word really means. And so since dogs bark and yap, they call him Caleb. That's what that means. In the east, packs of fierce wild dogs often wandered around the towns and villages. Hence, fierce and cruel men were called dogs. Dogs are also unclean animals to eat. So by the way of reproach, anyone is called a dog, a dead dog, a dog's head. Gentiles were also called dogs as being uncircumcised and thus disobedient to what? The laws of God. So here's the thing about Gentiles. They were called dogs not because they were not Jews, because that's completely wrong. Jews were called Gentiles in the New Testament, not non-Jews. They were always, almost always, there's one or two places where it is actually talking about non-Jews, but almost always in the New Testament text, if it used the word Gentile, it was talking about Jews who were disobedient to God's law. Now try to read your New Testament. Just saying. Next word is tashlichun, which is you shall cast. It's to cast, to throw stones, right? You get the idea. Oto. That's one of those arrow things. So the translation is, and you shall be to me holy men. You shall not eat flesh that was torn in the field. You shall cast it to the dogs. This is pretty clear, right? But of torn in the field, Rashi felt that this meat could be given to the non-Jews. But Deuteronomy 14:41 speaks of animals that die of natural causes, while this verse speaks of animals that are torn apart in the field by wild animals. See, Rashi's blending two things together that don't go together. That's why he came up with that. Even Ezra felt that torn flesh might be harmful to people and thus shouldn't be given to any human. Well, maybe that's right, maybe it's not. I don't like to do that. When God doesn't give a reason, I think we ought to just leave it alone. Of the word shall be to me holy men, Kasuto said, the nobility of your mission, you must behave like noblemen, not only from the spiritual aspect, but also in the sense that you cultivate fine habits and maintain the self-respect due to your calling. So this is about you going to town and something happens and you acting like a child of God instead of some wild-haired crazed person. Just saying. Well, this concludes our journey through chapter 22. Shalom, shalom.